In the waning years of the 15th century, amidst the parched, sun-baked plains and ancient, proud castles of Castile, a different kind of blossom unfurled. Not a stern, unyielding bud of religious fervor or martial might, but a bloom of quiet, intellectual fire. Joanna, the third child of Spain's formidable Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, while her elder siblings were carefully molded into exemplars of royal piety and dynastic duty, Joanna possessed a spirit that chafed against the rigid confines of courtly life. Her elder sister, Isabella, was groomed for the throne of Portugal, a dutiful, traditional princess. Her brother, Juan, the longed-for male heir, was showered with attention and education, destined to inherit both crowns. Joanna, in contrast, was often seen as the spare, allowed a slightly longer leash, perhaps because her parents believed her path would be less pivotal. This perceived lesser importance inadvertently granted her a precious fleeting commodity: freedom to think. She wasn't the boisterous, outdoor type. While her siblings might have been practicing falconry or riding across the windswept plains, Joanna was more likely found in the cool, hushed sanctity of the royal library. She devoured texts on theology, history, and philosophy, her keen mind wrestling with concepts that most noble women of her era were encouraged to ignore. She learned Latin, French, and a smattering of other languages, not out of mere obligation, but out of a genuine hunger for knowledge. Her tutors, initially perhaps perplexed by her intensity, quickly recognized an intellect as sharp as any male. Scholars. She sketched intricate designs in thick leather-bound books, her hands moving with a fluid precision that belied her youthful age. She found solace in the quiet solitude of her studies, a refuge from the endless drone of court gossip and the suffocating weight of royal protocol. Her ladies-in-waiting, accustomed to the frivolous pursuits of other princesses, often found her perplexing. "Your Highness, the Duke of Alba's procession. A magnificent sight," a young Innis might have exclaimed, her voice bright with courtly enthusiasm, only for Joanna to respond, without even glancing up, more velvet and pretense. "I prefer the honest lines of a cypress." It wasn't disdain. It was simply a profound disinterest in the superficial, a soul yearning for something deeper than glittering spectacle. But even the most unique bloom, nurtured in relative quiet, cannot escape the gardener's shears when its purpose serves a grander design. The Catholic monarchs, driven by an unshakable ambition to forge a unified Spain and extend its influence across Europe, viewed their children not merely as offspring, but as living bridges in a vast, intricate web of alliances. Joanna, with her royal blood and strategic position, was too valuable to be left to her philosophical musings. She was a piece on a chessboard, destined to secure the future of the burgeoning Spanish Empire. The target, a mighty Habsburg dynasty, whose domains stretched across Burgundy, the Low Countries, and eventually the Holy Roman Empire. This was a masterstroke of diplomacy, a calculated maneuver to encircle France, Spain's perennial rival, and solidify a powerful European bloc dot. And so, the decree came. Joanna was to be sent north to Flanders, a land of damp skies and bustling mercantile cities, a world away from the arid plains of Castile. Her betrothed was Philip the Handsome, the Archduke of Austria, Duke of Burgundy, and heir to a truly astonishing inheritance. The news, delivered with all the solemnity of a state proclamation, must have struck Joanna with a complex mix of emotions. Apprehension, certainly, at leaving the only home she had ever known, at abandoning the intellectual sanctuary she had so carefully carved out for herself. But perhaps, too, a flicker of curiosity, a nascent sense of adventure. This was a chance to escape the cloistered existence, to encounter a world beyond the Alcazar in August of Pic. After weeks of preparations and tearful farewells, Joanna embarked on her voyage. It was a perilous journey, a crossing of the vast, unpredictable Bay of Biscay, known for its treacherous storms. She was accompanied by a grand entourage, a fleet of ships laden with her dowry, her extensive wardrobe, and a retinue of Spanish nobles and ladies-in-waiting, all meant to ensure her comfort and underscore her royal status. The journey itself was a test of endurance, rough seas, and cramped conditions. But her mind, ever active, must have been alight with anticipation. What would he be like, this Philip the Handsome? Would he be another stern, traditional prince, or something different? When she finally disembarked in Laredo, after a storm-tossed journey that dispersed her fleet and delayed her arrival, and then continued overland to Flanders, the stage was set. The initial planned meeting, a formal introduction, was quickly overturned by an unexpected and thrilling development. Philip, eager and perhaps intrigued by the stories of his Spanish bride, chose to meet her ahead of schedule, not in a grand hall, but in a private moment. It was in Brussels, in a setting of opulent splendor, that their eyes first met. The cathedral, a soaring testament to Gothic grandeur, was alive with the hushed excitement of a royal wedding. Joanna, dressed in the heavy, rich fabrics befitting a Spanish infanta, walked down the aisle, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. And there he was, Philip, a vision of youthful charisma, a man of striking beauty and easy charm, with an air of effortless confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was everything her Spanish court was not: vibrant, outward, a breath of fresh air. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The carefully constructed walls around Joanna's heart, built by years of intellectual solitude and royal duty, crumbled. Their attraction was immediate, visceral, and undeniably scandalous. This was not the polite, detached appreciation of a political match. This was an electric current, a spark that ignited a deep, passionate fire. They defied all established protocol. Instead of the elaborate, drawn-out ceremonies typical of royal unions, they demanded to be married that very hour, their impatience overriding centuries of tradition. Philip, with his dazzling, confident smile, took Joanna's hand, his touch sending a jolt through her. Joanna, renowned for her composure, for her quiet dignity, uncharacteristically blushed deeply, a rare, genuine smile illuminating her face. It was a transformation, a shedding of her carefully maintained royal mask. She was no longer just a princess. She was a woman swept away by an overwhelming, exhilarating love. The Rose of Castile had fallen desperately in love. And in that love, an intensity born of her deeply passionate nature, lay not only the promise of immense joy, but also the unseen, insidious seeds of her future unraveling. For a mind as profound and a heart as fierce as Joanna's, such love was not merely an affection, it was a consuming force. And when such a force is placed in the hands of a fickle, charming, and ultimately selfish man, the consequences could only be catastrophic. The stage was set for a tragedy cloaked in the glittering facade of a royal romance. For a fleeting, incandescent period, the passion between Joanna and Philip burned so brightly, it seemed to defy the very conventions of European royalty. Their union was not merely a political alliance, but a tempestuous, all-consuming love affair that scandalized and fascinated the courts in equal measure. Joanna, once the reserved and contemplative princess, had transformed. The intellectual fire that had fueled her studies now poured into her devotion to Philip. She became utterly consumed by him, her entire world narrowing to the radiant focus of his presence. She bore him child after child with remarkable swiftness, a testament to their fervent physical bond. 6 children in total: Eleanor, Charles, Isabella, Ferdinand, Mary, and Catherine, destined to forge the future of Europe's royal houses, to sit on thrones across the continent, heirs to a truly vast and complex dynastic inheritance. Each birth, a new life, a new chain linking the proud houses of Trastamara and Habsburg. But beneath the surface of their passionate union, a darker, more insidious current began to stir, a poison in the well of her devotion. Philip, for all his undeniable charm and dazzling good looks, was a man of restless appetites and a shallow sense of fidelity. His magnetism extended far beyond his wife's bedchamber. He was a notorious womanizer, his numerous infidelities becoming the whispered fodder of the Flemish court. For a man accustomed to having his desires instantly gratified, the intense, almost claustrophobic devotion of Joanna proved both flattering and, ultimately, stifling. He was a butterfly, flitting from flower to flower, while Joanna was a vine, wrapping herself ever tighter around him. These betrayals, initially perhaps dismissed by Philip as minor transgressions, fueled a terrifying transformation in Joanna. Her fierce love, once liberating, mutated into an all-consuming pathological jealousy. She was not merely possessive. She was utterly obsessed. Her emotional swings became legendary. She would confront Philip, her voice rising and passionate, Spanish-laced accusations, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and fury. She raged at him, her quiet dignity replaced by an almost terrifying intensity. She was known to throw objects in her chamber in fits of despair, to weep inconsolably for hours, clutching a lock of Philip's hair, her only solace. There were even infamous incidents where she would physically attack the women she suspected of being his lovers, her royal decorum abandoned in a raw display of heartbreak and rage. One particularly scandalous account describes her having the hair of one of Philip's mistresses cut off publicly. The court, accustomed to the stoic, carefully controlled emotions of royalty, whispered in hushed tones of her melancholy, her fits, her disturbances. They didn't understand the depth of her passion, the absolute nature of her devotion. They merely saw the outbursts, the defiance of expectation. They began to use a terrifying word to describe her: madness. But was it truly madness, in the clinical sense, or simply the desperate, agonizing display of a woman consumed by a love that had become her entire identity, a love that was constantly being scorned and betrayed? It was the profound agony of a soul stretched beyond its limits, clinging to the only anchor it had ever known, even as that anchor dragged her into the depths. Her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, thousands of miles away in Spain, received increasingly alarming reports from their ambassadors in Flanders. They were horrified. Isabella, ever the pragmatic queen, feared for the succession, for the stability of the alliance they had so carefully forged. The idea of her beloved daughter, the future Queen of Castile, descending into such emotional chaos was unthinkable. At one point, Isabella seriously considered sending a fleet to Flanders, not to bring Joanna back to Spain, but to rescue her from herself, to impose a stricter control over her life, to protect the dynasty from her perceived instability. The whispers of madness began to solidify into a terrifying, formal diagnosis, a convenient label that would later serve powerful political ends. Joanna, meanwhile, grew increasingly isolated. Her Spanish ladies-in-waiting, loyal though they might be, were often caught between their queen's volatile moods and the disapproving stares of the Flemish court. Philip, growing tired of her intensity and increasingly dismissive of her emotions, spent less and less time with her. He found solace in his court, in his pleasures, in the company of those who did not demand his complete and unwavering devotion. He would often dismiss her emotional outbursts with a shrug and a casual wave of the hand. My wife's temperament is ... spirited. Spanish heat, I suppose. It shall pass. He might have quipped to a group of his nobles, unaware or uncaring, of the devastating impact his words and actions had on the woman who loved him with such fierce totality. Then, in November 1504, a cruel and pivotal twist of fate occurred. Her mother, Queen Isabella, the architect of modern Spain, the steadfast matriarch, died. For Joanna, this was a double blow. Not only had she lost her mother, but this. Death thrust her, ready or not, onto the very precipice of ultimate power. Joanna was now the Queen of Castile, inheriting her mother's vast kingdom. This immense power, however, came with a terrible, unforeseen price. Her husband Philip saw in Isabella's death not a shared destiny for him and his wife, but an opportunity. He would be king, he would rule, and he would ensure that his wife's increasingly erratic and emotionally fragile state, her so-called madness, conveniently kept her from her rightful throne, effectively making him the sole ruler of Castile. The stage was set for a power struggle between husband and wife, a struggle where Joanna, already teetering on the edge of emotional collapse, was ill-equipped to fight. Her love, once a passionate flame, had become a consuming obsession, a devastating dependency. And with the death of her mother, the last true authority who might have offered her genuine protection, Joanna was left exposed, vulnerable, and dangerously isolated, her fate hanging by the thinnest of threads in a world of ruthless political ambition. The chains of her obsession were tightening, and her love, once her greatest strength, was now becoming her greatest vulnerability. In 1506, a grand but ominous procession arrived in Castile. Joanna and Philip, the new Queen and King of Castile, returned to claim their throne. The air within the ancient, sun-baked courtyards of Burgos, where they held court, was thick with a tension that was almost palpable. The Spanish nobility, fiercely loyal to their traditions and deeply suspicious of the flashy, foreign Habsburgs, were already divided. Many still clung to the memory of Isabella the Catholic, and now they watched this beautiful, often erratic, queen and her charismatic, unfaithful husband with a mixture of hope and profound apprehension. Philip, with his effortless charm and calculated political maneuvers, immediately set about alienating the old Castilian guard, favoring his Flemish courtiers and advisors. Joanna, though the legitimate heir, found herself increasingly marginalized, her fragile emotional state a convenient tool for her husband's ambition. He sought to sideline her, to declare her unfit to rule, ensuring his own undisputed authority. But before the ink on their joint proclamation could even dry, before Philip could fully consolidate his grasp on the Castilian crown, tragedy struck with the swift, brutal precision of a serpent's bite. The scene unfolded not in a solemn council chamber, but on a sun-drenched pelota court in Burgos. Philip, forever vibrant and energetic, a man of boundless physical vitality, was engaged in a vigorous match, his laughter echoing across the palace grounds. In a flash, he collapsed. He clutched his chest, a sudden, searing pain. Courtiers rushed. To his side, their faces a mixture of alarm and disbelief. The man who seemed invincible, the very embodiment of robust health and aristocratic beauty, lay still. Philip, the magnificent, the handsome, the unfaithful, was dead. A sudden fever, some whispered, a consequence of drinking too much cold water. After the strenuous game, others, more conspiratorially minded, murmured of a more sinister poison, a political assassination masked as illness. Whatever the cause, the man who was both Joanna's torment and her universe, her sole anchor in a world that often made little sense to her, was gone. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to give way. For Joanna, his death was not merely loss. It was the ultimate, unspeakable betrayal. The anchor of her stormy soul, no matter how flawed or hurtful, had been severed. The consuming flame of her love, now without its object, had nowhere to go but inward, consuming her from within. In the terrifying void left by Philip's abrupt demise, something profound and irretrievable broke within her. Her initial shock gave way to a chilling, almost otherworldly calm. She knelt by his lifeless body, her tears seemingly dried, her eyes wide and fixed. She refused to believe it. This could not be real. He would return. He must return. Her behavior immediately. After his death stunned the court and fueled the rapidly circulating whispers of her madness. She refused to be parted from him. She ordered the coffin to remain open, constantly by her side. She would sit for hours, sometimes days, beside the bier, not weeping openly, but staring, as if willing him back to life, convinced that his beloved form would one day stir, that his eyes would flutter open and meet hers. She stroked his cold face, her fingers tracing the once familiar contours, spoke to him in hushed, intimate tones, as if he were merely sleeping, awaiting her touch to awaken. The court watched, aghast and horrified, as their queen descended into an unimaginable singular grief, a macabre vigil that defied all reason and custom. Her father, King Ferdinand, ever the pragmatic ruler, immediately attempted to take control. He understood the precariousness of the situation. A realm now without a king, and a queen spiraling into a deep public insanity. He ordered the burial to proceed with all due haste and solemnity. But Joanna, with a terrifying, unshakable resolve, born of her shattered heart, defied him. She possessed a queen's authority, however diminished by her state, and for once, she wielded it with absolute conviction. No one would take Philip from her dot, and so began one of the most bizarre and poignant royal processions in history. Joanna insisted on transporting Philip's coffin with her on a macabre, aimless journey across Castile. It was a journey dictated not by political necessity or logical itinerary, but by the tortured logic of a broken heart. They traveled only at night, under the cloak of darkness, her logic being that a widowed queen should not travel in daylight, but also, disturbingly, to prevent other women from tempting her beloved Philip, even in death. They stopped only in convents, isolated and hallowed ground, never in towns or cities where the common people might witness her descent, or where her husband's remains might be disturbed. In each stop, she would have the coffin brought to her chamber, and regularly, disturbingly, she would order it to be opened, to gaze upon his decaying face, to touch his cold skin, her only solace in a world that had become a desolate wasteland. For months, this chilling procession continued. She slept near his putrefying remains, the stench of decay becoming an unbearable torture for her loyal but increasingly desperate attendants. Yet Joanna herself seemed not to notice the odor. Or perhaps, in her profound grief and mental unmooring, she simply did not care. It was the smell of her lost love, however altered. Her love, once a vibrant, passionate flame, had transmuted into a consuming madness, a necrotic cling to the husk of what once was. The scene was one of unparalleled grief and terrifying devotion. A queen refusing to let go, even as life itself recoiled from her dot. The rumors of her madness that had circulated in Flanders now solidified into undeniable public spectacle. Behavior was beyond the comprehension of even her most loyal subjects. The woman who had once been the quiet, intellectual princess, the vibrant, passionate bride, was now a specter, haunting the roads of Castile, her only companion a rotting corpse. This was not merely eccentric behavior. This was a profound break from reality, a public unraveling that threatened the very fabric of the kingdom. Ferdinand, watching this unfold, saw his chance. His daughter, by her own actions, was providing him with the perfect justification to seize control. The crown of Castile, which he had fought so hard to unify, could not be left to a woman lost. In such a dark abyss, the stage was set for her permanent confinement. A move born not of malice, perhaps, but of a chilling political expediency. The queen was lost, and the king, her father, was determined to reclaim the power she could no longer wield. Her personal tragedy would become the justification for a political coup. The year is 1509, the mournful, peripatetic journey across Castile, a macabre dance with death, had finally come to its inevitable conclusion. Her father, King Ferdinand, the astute and ruthless pragmatist, had watched his daughter's horrifying descent with a cold calculation that blended paternal pity with an unyielding grasp of statecraft. A mad queen was not merely a family embarrassment. She was a profound liability, a dangerous vacuum of power that threatened the very stability of his hard-won kingdom and the meticulously crafted legacy of the unified crowns of Castile and Aragon. Her elder brother, Juan, the longed-for male heir, was long dead. Her formidable mother, Isabella, the very foundation of her world, was also gone. Joanna was undeniably queen by right, but her public, erratic behavior provided Ferdinand with the perfect, unassailable pretext for his ambition. She was unfit to rule. Ferdinand, consulting with his most trusted advisors, declared, "This can no longer stand. Her grief has consumed her reason. For the good of the realm, she must be secured." The euphemism was chillingly clear. Joanna was a problem to be contained, a wild, sorrowing animal to be caged for the perceived benefit of the state, under the guise of escorting her to a safer, more stable residence, a fortress where she could be protected from the dangers of the outside world. Joanna was taken to the remote, imposing castle of Tordesillas. This ancient stronghold, rising starkly from the Castilian plains, would become her gilded prison. It was here that the ultimate, cruelest separation occurred. Her husband's coffin, that gruesome, decaying fetish, her last physical link to her lost love, was finally, irrevocably taken from her. She resisted, of course, her voice a raw, desolate cry, but her resistance was futile. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and utterly broken. Guards, acting on Ferdinand's strict orders, gently but firmly led her away from the bier. She offered little physical struggle, but her eyes, wide and hollow, held a look of profound defeat, as if her very soul had been ripped from her body. The coffin, now removed from her sight, was finally interred in the nearby royal chapel of Santa Clara, a temporary resting place before its final journey to Granada. In the silent, echoing stone walls of Tordesillas, a fortress designed for defense, not for comfort, Joanna would remain for the rest of her life. The official narrative was carefully constructed. She was not a prisoner, they claimed, but under protective custody, receiving care for her melancholy. But the reality was a slow, agonizing confinement. A queen stripped of her crown, separated from all but one of her children, and systematically robbed of her dignity and autonomy. Years turned into decades within Tordesillas. Joanna, now much older, her vibrant hair streaked with gray, her once expressive eyes hollowed by solitude and despair, paced her chamber like a restless ghost. She spoke to herself, often in whispers, sometimes in agitated bursts, her thoughts, tangled in a ceaseless, mournful monologue. Philip... Where are you? They hide you from me, she would mutter, her voice raspy with disuse. But I feel you... still. Your presence is here, within these walls. She would cling to fragments of memory, distorted echoes of their passionate past, reliving moments of tenderness and agonizing betrayal in endless, looping cycles. The court chroniclers, who occasionally documented her state, painted a picture of a woman utterly lost to the world, refusing to bathe, neglecting her appearance, her royal robes decaying around her. Her own son, Charles, a young man who would go on to become the most powerful monarch in Europe, King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor, would later visit her. Charles, a product of that passionate, tumultuous union, carried the weight of both his Spanish and Habsburg heritage. He acknowledged her as queen, her legitimate claim to the throne providing the bedrock of his own immense power. But he kept her confined, unwavering in his decision, fearing that her unstable mind, Her potential for irrational acts would challenge his authority, or worse, provide a rallying point for political enemies. He needed her legitimacy, but not her presence. Charles's visits were rare, formal, and deeply unsettling. He would stand before her, an imposing figure of power, attempting to be kind, but there was an unbridgeable distance between them. A chasm of years, of lost sanity, of unaddressed grief. Joanna often barely seemed to recognize him, her gaze distant, fixed on some internal landscape of sorrow. "He loves me, ... He does," she would murmur to herself, disconnected from the powerful man before her. "He will come back. Philip will come back." She believed the love, or the idea of it, would manifest, would return the missing piece of her soul. He kept her locked away for over 40 years, a span of time that consumed almost her entire adult life. 40 years of solitude, of echoing, whispers, of fading memories and replayed heartbreaks. Her only companion, for a time, was her youngest daughter, Catherine, born after Philip's death and raised alongside her in the gloomy castle. Catherine, fiercely loyal and perhaps bearing the brunt of her mother's erratic behavior, would eventually marry the King of Portugal, leaving Joanna utterly alone with the silent stones of her prison. Later, as the years stretched on, her primary interaction was with her stern, but often enduring keeper, Bernardino do Campo, who would attempt to manage her declining health and increasingly peculiar habits. The narrative of madness served its political purpose perfectly. It justified Ferdinand's regency and later Charles's undisputed rule over Castile. But beneath the convenient label lay a human tragedy of immense proportions. A vibrant, intelligent woman whose profound capacity for love, when betrayed and then utterly shattered, drove her beyond the reach of reason. The cage of Tordesillas was not just a physical prison. It was the final devastating consequence of a love that had become her undoing, an obsession that devoured her soul. She was a queen, yet her life became a living death, a testament to the brutal realities of power and the devastating cost of a broken heart in a world that had no use for emotional fragility. The year 1555 arrived, and with it, the quiet, almost imperceptible end of a long and tragic life. Joanna of Castile, the queen whose heart had broken the bounds of reason, who had clung to the decaying specter of her husband's love, finally found release. She had lived to be nearly 76 years old, an astonishing feat for the era, particularly for someone whose life had been so consumed by emotional turmoil and physical neglect. She had outlived her formidable parents, the very architects of her destiny. She had outlived her philandering husband, Philip, the central figure of her obsession. And, with the exception of her eldest son, Charles, and her youngest daughter, Catherine, she had outlived most of her children, witnessing the deaths of Eleanor, Isabella, Ferdinand, and Mary from within the confines of her stone prison. The fierce, consuming love that had promised so much joy in her youth had, in the end, condemned her to a lifetime of silent, agonizing imprisonment. In her final days, the frail, ancient queen, her hair a wispy crown of white, her hands gnarled and trembling, sat by the window in her chamber at Tordesillas. Her gaze was often directed outward, fixed on the distant horizon, an unreadable expression on her face. Was she looking for Philip, still expecting his return? Was she seeing the vast, sprawling empire that her son now ruled, a legacy built upon her confined existence? Or was she simply lost in the vast, labyrinthine landscape of her own memories, reliving fragments of passion and betrayal, sorrow and longing? The question of whether Joanna was mad in the clinical sense, or whether her behavior was an extreme, defiant manifestation of grief and heartbreak, remains a subject of historical debate. History, in its convenient shorthand, largely casts her as Joanna the Mad Juana la Loca, a label that served its purpose for those who controlled her fate. It was a neat, efficient way to explain away a woman who did not fit the rigid mold of acceptable royal behavior, whose emotions dared to overwhelm courtly decorum, whose grief was too profound, too public, too inconvenient. But was it truly madness, or was it a profound, unaddressed psychological trauma, amplified by betrayal, isolation, and a genetic predisposition to melancholia that ran in her family line? The death of her brother, Juan, and later her mother, Isabella, deeply affected her, perhaps triggering a latent predisposition for depression. Philip's sudden death, the ultimate loss of the person around whom her entire world revolved, was the final shattering blow that broke her connection to reality. We, standing centuries later, primarily see her through the lens of those who imprisoned her, who benefited from her incapacity. The narratives of her father, Ferdinand, and her son, Charles, painted a picture of a mentally unstable queen, incapable of governing. These narratives were essential for their own power and legitimacy. But if we peel back those layers, if we allow ourselves to imagine her pain, the raw, unfiltered agony of a heart utterly shattered, the picture changes. Imagine the vibrant, intellectual young woman with her love for philosophy and her sketching, the passionate bride who defied protocol to marry the man she desired. Then imagine her slowly, agonizingly reduced to a phantom in her own palace, haunted by the ghost of a love that was both her salvation and her undoing. Her refusal to part with Philip's corpse, horrifying as it was, could be seen as the ultimate act of desperate, unyielding devotion, a desperate refusal to let go of the one thing that had brought her immense joy and then immense pain. On April 12, 1555, on Good Friday, Joanna finally found peace. She died in the castle of Tordesillas, having been locked away for 46 years. Her passing was quiet, perhaps even a relief. Her body, having endured so much emotional and psychological torment, finally gave way. She was initially buried in the royal chapel of Santa Clara, within the Tordesillas complex, the very chapel where Philip's coffin had rested for years. But her final resting place, the one she had yearned for in her tortured wanderings, was in the royal chapel of Granada, alongside her beloved Philip and eventually her parents Ferdinand and Isabella. In death, perhaps, their turbulent, passionate, and ultimately destructive union finally found a semblance of peace, a quiet embrace in the eternal sleep. The queen who had once slept with her husband's corpse for months, clinging to his putrefying remains, finally rested beside him, no longer bound by the chains of obsession, but by the quiet, unyielding embrace of eternity. Joanna of Castile, a queen whose historical narrative was overshadowed by the label of madness, a vibrant soul broken by love and betrayal, a mind consumed by a grief too powerful for this world. Her story echoes through time, a chilling testament to the precarious balance between profound human emotion, ruthless political power, and the devastating cost when that balance is catastrophically lost. Her life serves as a poignant reminder that even in the most glittering and powerful of realms, the human heart, when pushed beyond its limits, can fracture in ways that defy all logic, leaving behind a legacy not just of power, but of profound, unforgettable tragedy. Her madness, whatever its true nature, became her tragic crown, forever etching her name into the annals of history, not just as a queen, but as a symbol of love's beautiful and sometimes terrifying, destructive power.